Hey up and welcome to another episode of Last Cast. Today you join us on the banks of the River Calder, just upstream of John Cotton's. We're going to do something a little bit different today, which we've not really done, to be fair, on any of our videos, which is feeder fishing on a river. Now, as you can see, the peg behind it's a lovely wide peg, and today it's been apparent that it's absolutely full of dace as well, small fish. So what I'm looking to try and do today is target the bigger fish that are in the peg. So with that in mind, obviously we've got a nice far bank feature with that tree, and we're going to be chucking up to that today. So it's a dead simple sort of session. All I've done is mixed up some ground bait. I've got some worms, some casters, some maggots and some hemp, and a few dead maggots as well, and we're just going to keep introducing those towards the far bank. So I'll show you the ground bait mix that we've got today first. As you can see, what I've done is I've really heavily wetted this mix, way over wet compared to what we'd usually use on the river or even on lakes and that kind of thing. The idea behind that is I want to have a nice heavy mix that's quite inert and have no cloud that's coming off it because of the small dace that I mentioned earlier that are in the peg. Like I say, today we're trying to target the quality fish that are in front of us. So the mix is equal parts Sensus Magic Black, so a nice bready mix, quite heavy, takes on plenty of water. And I've also gone for Sensus Gross Gardon Noir, again another heavy bready mix, takes on plenty of water, really nice and heavy. You could use something like the Sensus River, but I find that's just a little bit too sticky for the feeder, especially on a peg like this where there is pretty much, to all intents and purposes, no flow on it, so it's not going to drive the ground bait out of the feeder. So that's the ground bait mix that we've got. So I've just mixed up probably about 3-4 pints of it, but we might have to mix up more based on what's going on, because we've already started fishing and had a few fish already. In terms of the tackle that we've got, I'm just fishing a 12-foot Maver Powerlight, a nice 1/2 ounce carbon tip. Again, there's hardly any flow on it, so I want to have quite a soft tip, and again, where perch are concerned as well, I want to have a soft tip just so they can get the bait down a little bit before they hook themselves. So that brings us on to the rig. So we'll start with the actual hardware in terms of the reel. So we've got a 4,000 size Shimano X-Age 010 braid, and I've got an 8-pound Daiwa sensor shock leader. This is the exact same gear that I tend to use when I'm fishing long range on reservoirs, but the reason why I've gone for braid is purely for that bite detection. Again, like I say, there's hardly any flow, so I want the braid to just cut through the river and pretty much fish direct to the feeder. The 8-pound shock leader obviously helps for casting and playing fish, but also a bit more robust because the Calder is known to have a few snags in it and there's a few rocks as well, so that just means that I've got a bit of durability in the rig. In terms of the rig at the bottom end, you can see I've got a 30-gram Preston feeder, open-ended feeder that's fairly solid. Again, because I'm putting the ground bait in sort of fairly loose but full of worms and dead maggots, I want to make sure that it's getting to the bottom before it breaks down. Initially I did start on a cage feeder, 20 gram, which is more than enough to hold bottom, but I found on that I was just getting bitted out by small fish. It's drawing a lot of dace in, it's falling a bit slower, creating a bit too much cloud. So like I say, I've gone for that to try and bomb the bait down and fish more positively. You can see on the rig as well, I always have a stop above the feeder. This is just a rubber float stop, and it means that I can create a bolt effect. So what we're fishing for on rivers is drop back bites. So ideally the fish need to be hooking themselves against the weight of the feeder. So as you can see, I've moved that right down to 1 inch now. When I started off again, I had it a couple of inches away and had a slightly longer hook length. But as I've had so many bites and missed a few as well, and I've had a couple of perch that have taken the bait well down, I've brought all this down and condensed it, so I'm fishing a much shorter hook length, and like I say, getting that bolt rigging effect. So below the feeder, I've just got it again on a short link. I did start on a longer link, but same again, like I say, I was missing a few bites, so I want them to just hook themselves against the feeder now. Below that, I've just got 2 number 9 stots, a twizzle boom, and then probably about 14 inches or so of 018 fluorocarbon. Nice heavy hook length, so again, a bit robust for the snags. I think it just helps the hook bait and everything get down a bit quicker as well with that heavier line, and no risk really of getting snapped off on it. And then beneath that, I've just got a size 14 Series 2 Tubatini hook in like I say, in a size 14, so it's probably the equivalent of a 12, but quite a fine wire. So again, ideal for fishing for perch, nice straight points, so they're going to hook themselves quite quickly. So that's basically it, dead simple stuff. So like I say, what we'll do now is turn around, get the feeder chucked out and see if we can get a couple of bites. Right, so we're ready to have our first cast on film. Like I say, I've been fishing for probably an hour or so now already, and I've had a couple of decent perch, a few smaller ones, even a nice dace and a roach about 10 ounce on this. So in terms of the feeders, you can see I've filled it full of chopped worm, plenty of dead maggots, and that nice heavy claggy ground bait as well. In terms of the hook bait, I'm fishing a full dendrobina. I was started off nipping the end of the dendrobina off, but again, that was attracting the small dace, and they were hitting the end of the bait, and I was getting a lot of little rattles on the tip and not a lot of positive bites. So a nice big target hook bait to fish with. So it's not too far of a chuck to get towards that tree at the far bank. So I'm just hitting the clip, feeling the feeder down, so that's just hit bottom. And then again, it helps with having a heavier feeder. I'm tightening right up to the feeder. So taking all the slack out of it, and that's where the braid really helps. I can feel as soon as I'm tight to the feeder. And quite simply, that's it. That feeder's now set. I'm tightening pretty much, I'd say 3/4 of the tension I can get away with on that tip down to the feeder. So there's just enough for the fish to bite, pull the tip round, and I should get a nice positive drop back. Again, it's not like when you're still water fishing where you want to basically have the tip almost as slack as you can get it at times to let the bite develop. On the river, I think, because they're feeding so ferociously, I want them to just be able to get that bait just in their mouths and then hook themselves against the weight of the feeder. So again, that's where it comes into it with having that nice little short 1-inch section of line where the feeder can run. So the fish, I'd say, could probably move maybe 4 or 5 inches tops before I see the indication and they feel the weight of the feeder and hook themselves. So that's the theory anyway. Like I say, when the fish are feeding that aggressively, what I don't want to do is give them loads of time to start playing around with the bait and end up getting deep hooked. Again, because there's hardly any flow, especially with perch, they'll tend to pick up the bait and then sit around the feeder. So we've got a couple of little rattles there and a nice drop back, but we've missed that one. I say it could be dace picking up the worm, so every time I'm coming back I'm just having a check of the bait and seeing what's had a go at it. So as you can see, I've got half a dendrobina now, so that was definitely a dace. So I'll leave that half dendrobina on and I'll just put a couple of dead maggots on to tip it. Again, just playing around with the hook baits a bit today. I don't think there's any virtue in fishing maggots because I will just be getting dace at that point. The same again, just filling the feeder, plenty of chopped worm, plenty of dead maggots. And again, because the ground bait's heavily over wetted, I'm not squeezing it in too hard. It's a firm squeeze, but not in the same manner as where you try and compress dry ground bait to plug the feeder. Same again, hitting the clip, fill the feeder down. I'm just pulling the braid back to create a nice tight line so I can feel the feeder. Getting a turn or so on the reel. And then just setting the tip. So my other thinking with putting dead maggots through the feeder as well is I think they're a bit more selective for big perch and a bit more inert, say casters occasionally can get kicked off the bottom. And I think that might draw some roaching. I've always got the option of putting hempen casters through the mix and changing what I'm targeting, but ideally I'm looking for these sort of big perch, maybe a chub, basically going for the bigger fish in the peg. So initially when I started today, like I say, I started on that light feeder, chucking across, and I was also feeding hempen maggots for a waggler line, so that's why I've got a waggler rod set up behind me. But again, very quickly, I had a couple of chucks on the waggler and I could see the dace swirling for it on the surface. So when we've got that many fish in front of us, I thought it might as well be a case of fishing for the bigger fish and targeting the better stamp, and hopefully building a weight that way. Again, with the size of some of the perch that are in the Calder now, between 10 ounce and say up to 2, maybe even 3 pound at points, you don't need many fish to do a really good weight. You know, a couple of these perch I've had today, say they go two fish would be close to 1.5 pounds. So they're well over 10-12 ounces a piece. So again, sort of 20-30 of those, you're on for a really nice weight. So in terms of the cast as well, again in line with the amount of small fish that are in front of us, I'm not casting too regularly. Again, when we're feeder fishing quite a lot, we'll cast every sort of 2-3 minutes, maybe 5 minutes. Today I'm looking to cast maybe every 10 minutes. Again, I'm not looking to put lots of bait out there. What I'm looking to do is just put a nice package of bait down, you know, a good mouthful of chopped worm if you like for a perch with a few dead maggots, and just basically fishing for one quality fish at a time rather than trying to really build the peg. Again, if I've decided to put a lot of bait out there, I find quite often with perch like that's not the way to try and target them. And the more bait I put out there, again, there's a chance of like a big shoal of dace coming in and ending up with quite a few missed bites. Just getting a couple of little wobbles on the tip. Again, I'm not looking to hit those bites. What I'm looking for is that sharp pull and a big drop back. And that'll tell me that a fish has hooked itself. So again, you might be able to see on the other camera the amount of dace that are swirling just downstream of where my tip is, where it's pointing. Again, that's why we've pretty much sacked off the waggler fishing. Same again, even if you were fishing a stick float, because there's barely any float, it's not really worth it. The only other way of fishing a peg like this to try and target the quality fish, I think, would be fishing hemp and tares or fishing on the pole, really positive with ground bait and bait droppers of chopped worm. But it's amazing how well the River Calder's fishing these days. It's probably fishing the best I've ever known it, certainly. The stamp of silver fishing here, the dace, the roach, even some quality chub show. And plenty of perch as well all the way through the sections. I mean, I've had one roach stay on the feeder that must be best part of 10 ounce already. So again, there's plenty of different ways of fishing the Calder. The only downside is the pegs are a bit awkward to get to on some of them. There's some really nice ones further downstream, but like I say, we've heard good things about this section recently, so we've decided to come up here today. We're getting a few indications on the tip now. So I'm hoping it won't be too long before one of the perch hangs itself on it. Right, so there's a nice big drop back on the tip there. You might have been able to see that on camera. Doesn't feel like a big fish, but again, you might be able to see how there was a sharp little indication the tip just really quickly dropped back. And there we go, that's a nice little perch. Probably one of the smaller ones of the session. And same again, he's taking the bait well down. Oh, there we go, so we've got a fish on now. Nice couple of rattles on the tip and then a nice drop back. So we've probably been fishing about 40 minutes now. We've had a couple of small perch and a couple of dace, and this looks like another small fish. Well, it's just dropped off there. I think since the sun's come up, the fishing's got a little bit tougher. Certainly we had a good run of fish before we put the cameras on, but like I said, we're just keeping a bit of bait going in, and hopefully the bigger fish will return in the not too distant. So same again, chopped worm, dead maggots, and a few grains of hemp in there, and I've just got 3/4 of a dendrobina on the hook at the moment. I'm also just trying casting around the peg just a little bit, so the odd cast I'm sending a bit further downstream. Just searching for the fish, because often with perch, especially larger perch, find on rivers like this, or even on still waters, you tend to get a small run of them and then they tend to disappear. So I've also taken the clip off and just gone another, probably about 3 feet past where I was originally casting. And that's where I've had that bite. So it's something worth bearing in mind when you're fishing on rivers like this and feeder fishing. Especially where there's not a colossal head of fish in terms of quality. It's worth just chucking around a little bit. I'm getting indication straight away there. There we go, that's a fish on. That feels like a better fish. Could be a trout this. It's charging about the river. Again, this is one of the reasons why I've gone for much heavier gear than I usually would. Yeah, it's definitely a trout leaping about. See, lovely soft rods for this. Not really what we're targeting today, the trout, but as I say, there's always a few in the Calder and they do run to a very good size as well, so we'll see what this one is. Looks like it's certainly a couple of pound at least. Again, with the strength of gear that I've got on, I've got no worries about sort of bullying these fish in. And some of them in the Calder can be 6, 7, even 8 pound at times. In fact, it even looks like a pike, possibly. So that'll be a first for me, catching a pike on the Calder. Just trying to get down the inside edge. In fact, it is a pike. I thought that'd be a trout there, with the way that it was jumping. I think he's just foul hooked himself as well. Obviously rolled over the line, would have been playing him. So I say we'll get him in and get back out there and hopefully snare a couple of perch. Could have been one of the reasons why it's gone quiet. As I say, we'll get this pike unhooked, pop back, and then we'll see if we can get a couple of perch on. He didn't like being hooked, did he? A pike on the tip. Right, so we've just had a bite there, pretty much as the feeder's dropped. And interestingly, I've just changed after catching that pike to a cage feeder. And as soon as I've chucked out, it's gone straight round. It's interesting, it might be the case, because I've had this on a few still waters, that the fish are actually following the feeder down and following the cloud. It's a nice little perch, hooks right in the scissors. So I didn't even get to put the rod on the rest that time. Just get the discorder on it. Nice little perch, only a couple of ounces though, not really what we're targeting. But as I say, I've just made the change to one of these Drennan grip mesh cage feeders from the original that I had on, which was a solid 30 gram Preston feeder. So it could be the case that that's made the difference there. We'll have another couple of chucks with this and see if it draws a few fish back into the peg. Again, quite often on still waters, for example, you'd be able to chuck out with a normal feeder. And if you're not getting any bites, sometimes it can be the case that the fish are sat off bottom, so fishing like a sloppy ground bait with a lot of cloud can be the way to sort of draw them down and onto your feed. So in similar effects, this is a flowing water. I don't want to fish a sloppy ground bait that's going to cloud up. But if I just switch back to this grip mesh feeder, I'll say there should be the odd little bit of ground bait flickering off the feeder as it's going down. It might be the case that perch has just followed it down that time. So we'll have a couple more chucks with this and see if that draws some fish into the peg. Again, I didn't want to carry on fishing this feeder, or don't want to carry on fishing it for too long, just in case it draws the small dace back into the peg. As I say, we're trying to target the better fish. But if it's the case that the initial run of better fish that I had earlier before we put the cameras on has sort of come through in a wave or a shoal of fish, it might be the case that I've got to draw fish back into the peg again by going back to how we started the session, which was with one of these grip mesh feeders. There's another indication there straight away. It's amazing the fact that I've just gone from, I've had about 40 minutes or so chucking the solid feeder with only 1 or 2 indications, and as soon as I've switched back to the cage feeder, I'm getting indications on the tip straight away. Again, they're not necessarily quality fish, but as long as I'm drawing some fish into the peg, hopefully that'll trigger other fish to come in and feed as well. So with this, I might just have sort of 5 or 6 quick casts, say 2-3 minute casts, just to try and get a bit of a column of bait falling down through the water and see if that draws them in. So there we go, we've just had another bite, and this one's pulling back a bit. It could be a trout, this. I'm saying that last time I said it was a trout, it was a big pike. Say a big pike, probably 3 pound. This is shaking its head, and it might even be a decent perch actually. Again, after those sort of 6 or 7 quick feederfuls with a cage feeder, I've just gone back onto the solid feeder. Not getting as many indications. But it's only been about 15 minutes since the change back, and this one's gone straight round. In fact, out of all things, it's a nice eel. So this will be the first eel I've ever caught out of the River Calder, this. So that's a proper turn up for the books. It's a really good size eel as well. So that'll be the last thing I expected to catch today. Right, so there you go, real turn up for the books on the Calder there. Wasn't sure what it was when I first hooked it, said it was shaking its head. Can't even hold them up, these eels. But that one's definitely a good couple of pounds, so a proper first for me on the River Calder. Nice little eel, so we'll get him slipped back. Is that even on? So we've just had another really positive bite. Again, looks like a small perch. I'm hoping as we get towards the end of this short session that we've had on the Calder that we start getting a couple of better stamps, because the stamp seems to have dropped as the day's gone on, surprisingly. Like I said, we'll get this one unhooked and hopefully get a couple of better fish. Same again, we're going to try with a good section of worm, but I'm going to switch the feeder again back to the cage, because the bite's still taking quite a while to come when we're on this sort of block end feeder, or the solid feeder I should say. So I'm actually going to increase the size of the feeder but go back to a cage. So rather than the 20 gram, I'm going for the large size 30 gram. Just basically try and feed really positively with chopped worm now. So hopefully that'll bring a couple of big fish into the peg. As you can see, that feeder's absolutely solid with chopped worm there. So we'll see if this draws a few fish in. Same again, getting nice and tight to the feeder. And one thing with feeder fishing on rivers, rod position's really important. So wherever you can, especially if you're casting across the river, it's not so much important when you're going and fishing down the inside or short. It's casting just slightly upstream and having the rod pointing downstream to create a bit of a bow. Again, as I said earlier, because we don't have hardly any flow on the river today, I'm effectively fishing direct onto the feeder or as near as damn it. But again, as the flow would pick up on sort of bigger rivers, that's where you want to have the rod pointed further downstream, a bit higher to get more line out of the water, than casting a little bit further upstream. So basically the feeder will settle in front of you at that point. As I say, with the Calder being the way it is today and as low as it is, we're effectively just fishing direct onto the feeder. So I've only got the rod fairly low and in the air, just keeping a bit of the line out of the water. And that's working just nicely for us to see the bites. So the last two perch that I've hooked have nearly pulled the rod in, despite them only being about sort of 2-3 ounces. Right, so there's another bite. And I think we'll probably call this one the last of the session. Okay, I don't think it's a big fish, and I think the peg's just got worse and worse as the day's gone on. So we've caught a good stamp of fish early before we put the cameras on, and it's just been really patchy after that. Okay, another small perch, so we'll get this one unhooked. Like I say, we'll call this the last of the session and then have a look at what we've caught. Right, so as you can see there's our final net of fish in a few hours fishing. See, we got some nice stamp perch earlier, but in typical fashion, as soon as we turn the cameras on, it seems like I got through the big fish and we just started having to scratch around for small fish, chopping and changing between the different styles of feeder, just to catch a few fish that sort of size. We've had some nice stamp fish today. We've even had a nice quality roach as well earlier that we didn't get on camera, as well as that eel, which is a bit of a pain to pick up. But as you can see, it's a decent weight of fish there. Like I say, a couple of better stamp perch, that sort of size. As I say, it's just been a nice day's fishing really. Hopefully there's a few tips on there about feeder fishing that we can pass on to you guys. They'll be useful to you on the local river too, similar to the Calder like it has been today. So we'll get these popped back, but as always from Last Cast, thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and we'll see you on the next video.